in Jonesboro with my girlfriend and a mutual friend. We went to Edgar Allan Poe Speakeasy, Edgar Allan Poe Stories and Macabre Cocktails. So, yeah, this is an acting company from Nashville, and they're on a nationwide tour. So they basically have four narratives from Poe's major works, and they each get up on stage at different times of the evening and they narrate or perform the part from his work. And in between their performances, they serve you a cocktail. And the cocktail is a theme related to the work that they're going to narrate on the stage. So I was the designated driver, but just to give you an example of what they were, the second one was the Cat's Meow, a twisted version of Poe's favorite brandy milk punch. So you have aged bourbon meets with fruity brandy, accompanied by vanilla cinnamon milk, sweet cream, and maple syrup. That's the one I wanted to finish, but I just sipped on all four cocktails. Point being, if I had drunk all four, I wouldn't be here this morning. So that's got nothing to do with biblical prophecy. I'm just giving myself credit for extreme restraint. All right, let's get back to the prophets. So, okay. So, growing up in a very traditional Irish and Catholic home, you might be surprised to hear that one of the religious texts that we did not have in our home was a Bible. Why? Well, because for generations Catholics were taught or led to believe that the only persons with the authority to read and explain the sacred scriptures were ordained ministers of the church, namely priests and bishops. Consequently, the only times I would hear the names of any prophets mentioned in my formative years were maybe at Mass on Sunday, or perhaps when I stumbled upon a pious verse on a random Christmas card. Unlike mainstream Protestant churches, children's Sunday school and Wednesday Bible study groups were not features of Catholic culture, at least not when I was growing up. So there weren't any Bible trivia sleepovers in my home. Okay, but even for those who were raised in church-going Protestant households, a well-rounded understanding and appreciation of biblical prophets wasn't necessarily a given. There's like a popular imagination of what prophets, who prophets were. For example, they're seen as wild-eyed, well, in many cases, as wild-eyed visionaries or stern doomsayers, speaking out against corrupt societies with divine warnings of judgment and hope. They are typically portrayed as mystical figures with direct lines to God, delivering cryptic or dramatic messages about the end times, morality, and justice. This image blends awe and fear, shaped by sometimes iconic depictions in film, literature, and art, where prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, or Elijah are cast more as supernatural messengers than historical or theological figures. However, their role as voices of truth in times of crisis continues to resonate as a symbol of moral clarity and divine authority. And that's what I want to reflect on in a few moments. But before going there, I want to offer a little reflection on what I learned about the prophets when I studied for a postgraduate degree in theology back in my late 20s. 3 important lessons have remained with me. Firstly, I discovered that in the Old Testament, the prophets are divided into 2 groups, major and minor prophets, not based on their importance, but on the length of their writings. The major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, have longer, more complex books that address broad themes like judgment, exile, and restoration. The 12 minor prophets, including Hosea, Amos, Micah, and Malachi, wrote shorter books that often focus on specific events or regions, but still carry powerful messages of justice, repentance, and hope. And together, they form a rich tapestry of prophetic traditions central to the Hebrew Bible. Secondly, I learned that the prophet Isaiah, who lived and wrote between 740 and 701 before the Common Era, was most likely not one person. Most biblical scholars now believe that the book of the prophet Isaiah, as it's correctly known, was written by 3 scribes over 3 distinct time periods. First Isaiah, this would be chapters 1 to 39, is attributed to the historical prophet Isaiah of Jerusalem, who lived in the 8th century BCE and warned of judgment against Judah and its neighbors. Second Isaiah, chapters 40 to 55, written during the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE, offers messages of comfort and the promise of return. Third Isaiah, chapters 56 to 66, likely comes from a post-exilic prophet or group of disciples addressing the challenges of rebuilding Jerusalem and maintaining faith. Together, these voices reflect evolving contexts, but a unified theological vision. And the third lesson that stayed with me, and the most important, I learned from my study of biblical prophets, was the importance of employing the historical critical method of biblical interpretation when attempting to understand their respective messages. Employing the historical critical method situates their messages within the specific cultural, political, and religious contexts in which they were delivered. And this approach helps readers discern the original intent of the prophets, who often spoke in response to concrete events such as wars, exile, social injustice, or idolatry. By examining factors like authorship, dating, audience, and literary structure, the historical critical method moves beyond surface-level readings and reveals the depth and nuance of prophetic texts. It allows modern readers to appreciate the enduring relevance of these messages while respecting their rootedness in history. So, in preparation for my presentation today, I read, it's titled The Tears of Things, Prophetic Wisdom for an Age of Outrage by Richard Rohr. So, Richard Rohr is now in his early 80s. He's a Franciscan monk who founded the Center for Action and Contemplation in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And in my opinion, he's one of the most prolific writers on Christian spirituality in the world today. Now, he's not a scripture scholar, but his genius lies in interpreting biblical writings from a contemporary spiritual moral standpoint, noting both their flaws and their applications to a world in apparent chaos. A central theme in his book is that of what he calls holy disorder. The classic pattern of order, disorder, reorder in both the evolution of the prophet's writings in human history and in the times we are currently living in. In his words, reforms rarely move directly from the existing order to a new order automatically, or by a single positive insight. The old order has to somehow show its disorder, its shadow self, its injustices, its wrongness. Then there must be a period of disorder, a fertile time of searching before a new order can be found. And this is where the mature prophets can help us. They are the ones who persistently critique the dysfunctionality, hypocrisy, inequalities, and injustices in our world. They call out the demon in our midst. And until this collective shadow self is revealed for what it is, along with our unconscious or complacent complicity, our quest for wholeness as a human community remains incomplete. In 2019, I delivered a similar presentation here on modern-day prophets. I mentioned people like the writer Ta-Nehisi Coates, a novelist and Atlantic contributor, Greta Thunberg, a young and intrepid environmentalist, and Marianne Williamson, a best-selling author and political activist. In a word, they and many like them are the social order disruptors of our times. As I noted in that talk, a true prophet of our times will not leave you feeling warm and fuzzy inside. His or her words will not comfort and console you. They will disturb you to your core. And in the words of Richard Rohr, if such internal, legitimated critics are not allowed, let alone encouraged and trained, history will only move forward at the cost of blood and heartbreak. All right, now I'm coming to the central question of what I wanted to share with you. How might we apply Rohr's classic pattern of order, disorder, reorder, or what he calls the prophetic rule, to the confusing, fearful, and chaotic times we are currently living in? Well, firstly, you only have to look at human history to get a clear picture of how this classic pattern is consistently at play. We moved from hunter-gatherers and a feudal system of farming to movements like the Enlightenment, the modernist era, to postmodernism and neo-modernism. We've seen empires rise and fall, and dictators come and go. In most cases, established paradigms crack and crumble, or they go through a period of purification and renewal. So given the state of our world today, with its perpetual wars, political tribalism, cultural polarization, and egregious inequalities and injustices, is this what is happening at the moment? In a word, I believe yes. Here's how I see it. The pre-pandemic global landscape represented a relative sense of order, marked by economic growth, technological advancement, and interconnectedness. However, recent years have plunged societies into disorder through the COVID-19 pandemic, climate crises, political polarization, and social unrest, disrupting norms and exposing deep systemic flaws. Now the world stands at a pivotal moment of reorder, as individuals and institutions seek to rebuild with greater resilience, equity, and sustainability. This transformative phase holds both uncertainty and hope, echoing the prophetic call to reimagine justice and community in the face of brokenness. Again, in the words of Richard Rohr, in reality, the prophetic way is to pass through disorder to a new stage that does not eliminate or deny the tiers of things, but instead includes them at a new level. We must also trust that what seems like disorder is the portal through which we move from what we think is lasting order to something genuinely new. We must include the shadow side in the solution. I believe that a close reading of the prophets of old and a deeper appreciation of the prophets in our midst can help us to do this. So by way of conclusion, I'd like to do two things. I'd like to share with you Richard Rohr's reflection at the end of his book. He calls it The Way of the Prophet. And it summarizes succinctly and poetically the true nature of what constitutes a mature prophet. And I will follow that with a little amalgam of verses that I put together from the book of the prophet Isaiah. I kind of paraphrase them a little bit. And although they're written in a very different time and cultural historical context, I think they offer us a universal message of hope, faith, and courage in times of uncertainty or even chaos. Okay, so Richard Rohr's The Way of the Prophet. Prophets embrace religion as a way of creating communities of solidarity with justice and suffering. They look for where the suffering is and go there, just as Jesus did. They speak of solidarity with one God, which also implies union with all else. They are essentially mystical and unitive, not argumentative. The goal they proclaim is not to prove oneself worthy, innocent, or pure. The prophet learns to be for and with and not against. They are for those who are suffering or excluded. They have perfected the art of self-criticism, and they make it their priority. They include the opposites and thus transcend them. Salvation to them is the unitive consciousness in this world, not the anticipation of later rewards or fear of future punishments. They are centered not on sin, but on growth, change, and life. They know that the best teachers are reality itself and creation. They live well with paradox and diversity in their mature stages. They do not reject the way of the priest. They have just moved beyond it alone. They are not based in fear of God or self. They are always drawn to higher levels of motivation. Salvation is first of all experienced now, as are rewards and punishments. They start with judgment but end with the divine pity. They call forth tears more than anger, the tears of everything. And those tears are more tears of gratitude and joy than tears of sadness for what might have been. And lastly, just these verses from Isaiah that I chose as a way of a prayer of hope, courage, and faith moving forward. When the earth trembles and the skies darken, when the way ahead seems hidden in shadow, remember the voice of the Holy One who spoke through the storm. You are not abandoned. Nations may rise and fall, cities may crumble, but the word of the Lord stands forever. Even in exile, even in silence, God whispers to the heart that still seeks him. Lift up your eyes, you weary soul. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The everlasting God does not grow tired or weary. He gives strength to the faint and to those who have no might. He increases power. In days of chaos, faith is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to stand anyway, to trust the arm unseen but unshaken. The God who formed the stars by name also holds your future in his hand. So take courage. Though the waters rise, they will not overwhelm you. Though fire surrounds you, it will not consume you. For the Lord walks beside you, and his promises are not shaken by the storms of the world. He makes rivers in the desert and paths in the wilderness. He's doing a new thing, even now. Can you not perceive it? Thank you for your time and attention.